Do you believe in forgiving or forgetting?
I will start where everything that had been quietly rotting for years finally snapped, because it was not a screaming match or a broken plate or a dramatic exit with a coat thrown over my shoulder. It was my mother lifting her glass, tapping it with a spoon like she was the queen of some tiny kingdom, and saying in that careful voice she uses when she wants to land a punch without leaving a bruise that she wanted to toast, the child who never disappointed her, and then holding her gaze on my brother like the rest of us were furniture, and I swear I could feel everyone lean into the moment the way people lean toward a television when the game is in overtime, not because they love you, but because they are waiting to see if you flinch. I did not flinch, and that was new, because my usual role is to soften the edges, to smile, to make a joke, to rescue the mood like a stagehand who knows exactly where the sandbag is stuck. But this time I let the sentence sit there like a stain you cannot pretend is part of the pattern, and I reached for plates, because cleaning is the safest place for the forgotten person. And as I carried the dishes to the sink, I heard the little compliments directed at my brother, the shoulder pats, the "you deserve it" murmurs, and I understood in real time something I had known for years in the abstract, which is that my place in this family is utility, not celebration, and if I stopped being useful, they would not have a language for me at all. You know that tone people use when they say your name as if they just remembered you exist and want credit for it. That soft, surprised, "oh, there you are, honey." Well, that is how my mother thanked me for handling the mess. And I nodded like a waitress who knows the tip has already been decided, and I kept moving because motion helps. It keeps your face from doing things you cannot take back, and I stacked glasses, wiped surfaces, and loaded the dishwasher the way I have loaded so many other things in this family: problems, bills, appointments, apologies, while they compared my brother's wins to medals he apparently earned for surviving the life they built around him. I am not going to dress this up with scenery, because the only detail that matters is the quiet, the kind of quiet that happens in your head when it finally clicks that there is no promotion coming, no late discovery of fairness, no last-minute confession from the bench that the wrong child got the starring role, and in that quiet I understood, with the kind of clarity that makes your hands steady, that I am done auditioning, done serving as the buffer, done volunteering for love that never shows up, and I do not need a scene to end a role that was never written for me. So I helped my mother cut the cake. I handed my brother the first slice. I smiled in the photos like a person who has already signed the papers, and no one noticed that something irreversible had happened because it did not look irreparable. It looked practical. It looked like me being me, the helpful one, and that is the first trick I learned that night, that if you end a relationship in the same posture you maintained for years, no one suspects you have left until they reach for you and you are not there. After everyone went home and the text messages started, the thank yous and the "so nice to see yous" and the "can you send me those photos," I rinsed the knives and let them air dry, which is something my mother hates because she believes everything must be wiped right away. And leaving them to dry on their own felt like a small refusal that would not start a war but would still be a no. And then I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a spiral notebook, and I wrote down, in plain words, every place where my name holds up their world, the shared storage unit my brother has been using without paying a cent because I kept the autopay from when I helped him move, the emergency contact forms where I am listed as the person who will drop everything and show up, the business loan where my credit was the umbrella during his rainy season, the streaming accounts, the family plan on the phone bill, the annual donations made in my name but claimed by someone else as generosity, and as I made the list I felt my shoulders loosen in a way no compliment ever produced. People think revenge is noise, but the most effective kind is bookkeeping, and that is what I decided my payback would look like: a clean ledger and a shut door, because I wanted results, not a confession. And I do not need them to admit anything for the balance to shift. I only need to stop paying interest on a story that never included me, and to do that I have to stop being the infrastructure they pretend is the wallpaper. So here is the part you will either understand or judge, and I can live with either, because I opened the storage account and scheduled a termination for the end of the month. Which means my brother will receive a polite email telling him to vacate or start paying like a grown man, and I removed my card from the family phone plan and moved my number to a separate account. And I drafted a short note to the bank officer who helped him secure that friendly rate years ago, a note that did not accuse or explain, just clarified that I would be removing myself from any future obligations effective immediately, and I saved it as a draft, not sent yet, because the order matters and the timing is its own kind of sentence. Then I put my phone face down, which is not something I usually do because I am the person who answers, the reliable one, the human customer service line with no-hold music. And I sat there thinking about how many times I have said yes to keep the temperature down, to stop my mother from spiraling, to avoid another lecture about how my brother is under so much pressure and how he needs support. And I realized that the only person I have protected with all that yes is the version of me they prefer, the silent helper who accepts a participation ribbon and pays for the medal. When the message finally came, it was from my brother, short, rushed, and pretending to be concerned while really asking a question that gave everything away, because he wrote that our mother had been crying all night and wanted to know if that was me. And I looked at those words and understood that even in her tears I existed only as a cause, never as a child, and that is when I smiled, not because she was crying, I am not built that way, but because the plan had started working before I sent a single explanation, and since he asked if it was me, I decided to answer in the only language that ever makes a dent in this family, which is action over talk. So I went back to my list and flipped the first switch for real. Confirmed the storage cancellation and archived the confirmation so it would not be lost in the noise, and then I set my phone down again and let the silence do what words never could. If I am being honest, the moment at my mother's birthday was not an isolated explosion, but the natural result of years spent in a family dynamic where I was always the background music, present, consistent, and holding things together, while my brother was the main act, bathed in a spotlight he did not have to earn because from the very beginning it seemed as if our roles had been assigned and could not be changed no matter what either of us did. I had learned to live with it the way people live with an old injury that aches when the weather shifts, annoying, limiting, but so familiar you almost forget it is not normal until one day someone pushes in exactly the wrong spot and you realize you have been walking crooked for years. Growing up, I noticed early that achievements did not carry the same weight depending on whose name was attached to them. When I brought home straight A's, my mother would nod, sometimes ask what my brother had gotten, and then move on to something else, as if I had told her the weather forecast. When my brother managed AC in a class he had been failing, there were congratulations, a special dinner, even phone calls to relatives to share the good news. I told myself it was just parenting styles. Maybe she thought I was more independent and didn't need the praise, but as the years went on, the pattern became impossible to ignore. It was not just about school or grades. In my 20s, I worked 2 jobs while taking night classes to finish my degree, paid my own rent, and managed to keep my head above water without borrowing a dime from anyone. But when my brother landed a part-time job at a local car dealership and lasted 3 months without getting fired, it was spoken of in the family as though he had just been appointed to the Supreme Court. And yet, when he lost that job for not showing up on time, there was no scolding, no lecture, just sympathy about how some environments aren't a good fit and assurances that something better would come along. What made it worse, and what I only truly recognized in the last few years, was that despite being treated as the afterthought in terms of affection or recognition, I had somehow become the backbone they leaned on whenever the cracks in their lives needed sealing. My credit was good enough to help my brother get a business loan when no one else would sign with him, because I had spent years making payments on time and keeping my debt low. I kept a storage unit in my name that he filled with his stuff when he moved out of his apartment, promising he would take over the bill within a few months, which of course never happened. When my parents had trouble navigating online systems for bills or insurance, I was the one on the phone, the one filling out forms, the one driving across town to drop off signatures because apparently mailing something was too much effort. And all of that, every favor, every financial tie, every quiet fix, became normal, to the point where I think they genuinely forgot those things were favors and not obligations. They expected my help the way people expect the lights to turn on when they flip a switch, without ever thinking about who pays the power bill or changes the bulb. The part that stings, looking back, is realizing how much of my time and resources I poured into keeping everyone else comfortable while receiving so little in return. Not even basic acknowledgement. Just the unspoken assumption that I would always be available. The real shift in my thinking began a couple of years ago when I had a minor health scare that required some time off work and a few expensive tests. I remember calling my mother, not to ask for money, but just for a little emotional support, and she told me she couldn't talk because my brother was having a rough day and needed her. When I asked what happened, it turned out he was annoyed because his car needed repairs and the mechanic had quoted him a price he didn't like. That was it. My mother chose to comfort him over a bill he could have paid with the money he spent on new golf clubs the month before, instead of giving me 5 minutes to talk through my fear of what the doctors might find. That was the first time I really sat with the idea that in her world, my problems were inconveniences and his were crises. So when the birthday party toast happened, it wasn't as though I suddenly saw the truth, it was that I finally stopped pretending it didn't matter. I understood that day that my value to them had nothing to do with my worth as a person and everything to do with the ways I could be used to make their lives easier. And when you see that clearly, you start asking dangerous questions, like what would happen if I just stopped? After the party, when I sat down with that notebook and listed all the ways my name and resources were tied to theirs, it wasn't just a list, it was an inventory of leverage I had never noticed before. I realized I could walk away without a scene, without begging for understanding, without needing to explain myself over and over. All I had to do was quietly remove the supports they had been leaning on, and gravity would do the rest. I could stop being the unpaid insurance policy for every bad decision they made. It was almost funny, in a dark way, how quickly the idea went from hypothetical to inevitable in my mind. I didn't feel guilty, and that surprised me. What I felt was something close to relief, like maybe I had been holding my breath for years and was finally ready to exhale. The text from my brother that night, the one asking if I had made our mother cry, only confirmed what I already knew. My silence had unsettled them more than any argument ever could. And if silence could do that, I was curious to see what action might do. The first step would be small, almost invisible, but it would send the message loud enough for them to hear without me saying a single word. I would choose the one thing they thought they had permanent access to, and I would take it back. The rest would follow, one quiet cut at a time. The next morning I woke up with that loose, steady feeling you get when you have finally decided your own boundaries and you know you are going to keep them even if someone cries or shouts or brings up family loyalty like it is a coupon they can redeem whenever they want. And I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started with the easiest cut because the storage unit was clean paperwork and unarguable math, and there is something deeply satisfying about clicking a button that says terminate and realizing that you are ending more than a monthly charge. You are ending the assumption that your time and credit are communal property just because you are related by blood and history. I called the storage company to confirm the notice and asked the clerk to send the formal email to the address on file, which happens to be my brother's because he wanted to get notifications in case he needed to grab something on short notice. And while the clerk read the policy about vacating by the end of the month, I took notes like I was at work, because treating this like a job kept me from slipping into that old habit of explaining myself, and when the confirmation hit my inbox I archived it, set a reminder for the final day, and stared at the screen for a long minute, not because I was unsure, but because the quiet after a clean decision feels like when you finally stop hearing a background hum you did not know was there, and you realize how much energy it had been stealing from your brain. Then I opened the email draft to the bank officer and rewrote it one last time, keeping it short, factual, and impossible to argue with, because I have learned that the more you explain, the more opportunities you hand people to twist your reasons into something ugly. I wrote that I would be removing myself from any association with my brother's business obligations effective immediately, that I understood their process might involve a review of the terms, and that I was available to sign whatever documentation they required to finalize my withdrawal, and I read it out loud to make sure it sounded like a person you do not want to challenge, not because she is loud, but because she is done. Before I hit send, I sat with the choice the way you sit with a big purchase to see if it still makes sense after a breath, and it did. because here is what no one ever says out loud when families lean on the reliable daughter. A cosigner is not love. It is collateral, and I was done being the safety net for someone who cannot be bothered to check where he is jumping, so I sent the email, watched the little whoosh, and felt no fear, only a calm readiness for whatever bounced back. Right on cue, the phone started buzzing with group chat chatter about leftovers and photos, and my mother's voice messages that opened with a sigh and slid into a lecture about kindness and how family should not keep score, which is rich coming from a woman who keeps score with one column labeled golden and the other labeled invisible, and I listened to exactly none of it, because there is a free pleasure in not picking up the phone when people who never listen suddenly want to talk. And instead, I opened my banking app and separated my number from the family plan, moved my subscriptions into my own account, and shut off the little conveniences my brother had treated like air. Because if you cannot say thank you for oxygen, then maybe you should learn what it feels like to hold your breath for a second. By mid-afternoon, the first message came in from my brother, not angry yet, just confused in that way people get when the machine they've been using without reading the manual suddenly requires a key they never bothered to ask for. And he asked if I had touched the storage account because he received an email that made no sense, and he had some seasonal stock in there he needed for a pop-up later this month, and could I cancel the cancellation until he sorted it out? And normally that is where I would have said sure, no problem, because that is what I do. I smooth, I delay conflict, I give my time like a vending machine that takes guilt as payment. But this time I put the phone down and went for a walk around my living room, breathing through the urge to rescue. And when I sat down again, I typed a sentence that felt like a new muscle firing. I am no longer paying for that unit. You will need to move your things or take over the contract by the end of the month. And before he could volley back with the sentimental junk shots he learned from our mother, I muted the thread and put my device face down like it was a hot pan. An hour later, a new email arrived from the bank officer, polite and efficient, confirming receipt of my request and asking me to come in to sign some release forms, adding that they would be reviewing the loan terms now that the cosigner arrangement was changing, which is a phrase that can make a grown man sweat depending on his records, and I felt a flicker of something that was not joy exactly, but was definitely relief dressed as justice, and I scheduled the appointment for the following morning, because if they wanted confirmation that I meant this, I would bring a pen with fresh ink. By evening, my brother's tone had sharpened into that defensive half-angry, half-charming thing he does when he senses he is losing ground, and he asked what this was really about, because surely I could not be that upset about a toast. Which is revealing, because it means he clocked the moment as well as I did, and he tried to sprinkle in a few compliments about how he appreciates everything I do, which would have been lovely a decade ago, but now read like someone handing you a gift card that expired last week, and I let the message sit unanswered while I cooked myself dinner, and felt something like appetite for the first time in a while. Just before I went to bed, another notification popped up, this time a calendar invite tagged urgent from a bank address I recognized. Not to me, but forwarded by my brother with a note that said the officer wanted to meet with him about the loan and could I please come with him because my presence always helps calm things down, and I stared at that line and laughed a little in a way that was not mean. Just free, because there it was, the reflex he does not even hear, the assumption that I will show up as the human fire extinguisher, and I closed the invite without responding, silenced the phone, and lay down with the delicious knowledge that tomorrow would bring the first official signature of my exit, and they could cry or charm or bargain. But the pen would still move across the page, and the ink would still dry. I went to the bank first thing in the morning with a calm that did not feel like bravery or anger, but like administrative hygiene. The way you finally schedule the appointment you have been putting off for years because you know nothing good grows in neglect. And I sat across from an officer who treated me like an adult whose choices mattered, slid the release forms across the desk, and walked me through each line with the kind of clarity I have never once received from my family, and when I signed my name, I felt the steady click of a lock I should have turned a long time ago, because the document did not just remove me from a balance sheet, it removed me from a story where I was the emergency exit. Before I left, I asked a few questions that in the past I would have avoided because I did not want to make trouble, and the officer answered without drama that yes, when a cosigner removes herself, the the bank reevaluates the risk, and yes, depending on the borrower's record and collateral, rates can change, covenants can be enforced, and in some cases instruments can be called early, which is not a threat, it is simply the math of adult commitments, and I nodded. Not because I wanted pain for my brother, but because for once the consequences would flow to the person who created the risk rather than to the person who cushioned it, and that is what accountability looks like when you strip it of speeches and guilt. I stepped outside to a stack of missed calls and a handful of messages that all smelled the same. My mother with her voice pitched low for sorrow asking why I was doing this to the family. My brother using the word we, like a rope thrown across my shoulders to pull me back toward his problems, and a couple of relatives who only appear when there is gossip to transport, asking if everything was all right while carefully fishing for details they could repeat at dinner. And because I am finally done handing out free explanations, I said nothing. I let the voicemail transcripts pile up, and I turned off read receipts like a person who remembers she is allowed to control her own settings. By lunchtime, the friend who always knows the real story before anyone admits it, a former colleague of my brother named Aaron who has never pretended he is anything other than charming and unreliable, sent me a one-line text that did not celebrate or accuse. It just said that the bank review would spook his suppliers, and if he had been skating the edge on terms or inventory financing, the quiet changes would ripple faster than the family could spin them. And I thanked her not because I needed the warning to save him, but because information is power and I had decided my revenge would be built with clean information and firm boundaries rather than with public scenes I would later be asked to apologize for. So I spent the next hour doing the sort of maintenance I have avoided because it felt selfish to protect myself, and I finally admitted it is not selfish to stop being available to be used. Which is why I submitted freezes with the credit bureaus to block any soft pulls or surprise applications that might float across my name now that the safety net has been rolled up, and I sent a short, professional note to my brother's landlord, whose name is on file because I handled the original lease addendum when he expanded and asked me to just read it over, clarifying that I have no role, no guarantee, and no authority connected to his tenancy and requesting that their records reflect that. And I copied myself on the thread so there would be a clean paper trail if anyone tried to get creative later. My mother's messages changed shape by late afternoon, as they always do when the first stage of guilt does not land. She moved from sorrow to authority, telling me I was being dramatic and ungrateful and that I should call the bank back to reverse whatever nonsense I had started, as though releasing a cosigner were the same as returning an impulse purchase, and she tossed in a reminder about everything the family has done for me, which made me laugh out loud in a tired way because if she ever had to list those things with dates and amounts like I just listed mine, the page would not take long to fill, and instead of answering I opened my contacts and removed myself from every hospital and school emergency form I could find. Because if I am only visible when someone needs a signature or a ride, then they can learn how to dial the main number like everyone else. Early evening brought another shift, this time from my brother, who finally dropped the charm and asked outright if I had frozen my credit, because the bank could not complete a refinance check that he thought we discussed, which is a neat trick, converting his plan into our plan, and he asked me to come to a meeting because they always like seeing you, which is a sentence that should be printed on a banner above my old life, and I replied with the plainest truth I could manage, that my credit and my time are no longer available to support his business, that I have removed myself from all obligations, and that any further requests should go through his attorney or the bank, which is both kind and final. That is when Erin called, not to stir the pot, but because she has never liked watching me bleed quietly, and she said one of his bigger vendors had put a hold on a shipment pending updated terms. Not catastrophic on its own, but a sign of how fast the tide can turn when the scaffolding is yanked away, and for a second I felt the old tug to step in and pull a lever, to call someone I know and smooth it over. But I let the instinct pass and pictured all the nights I sat up filling forms while my own life waited in the other room, and I decided the kindest thing I can do for both of us is to teach him by absence what he would not learn by advice. For my own protection, because I do not trust desperation around paperwork, I gathered scans of every transfer and payment I have ever made on his behalf, seed funds labeled as loans that were treated like gifts, subscription charges that never got reimbursed, storage statements, signed emails, and I bundled them into a single, neat packet with a short cover note that stated, without emotion, that these records represent personal support I am not pursuing, that I hold no claim on his company, and that my expectation is simply to be removed wherever my name remains. And then I sent that packet to the bank officer with a polite thank you for the morning meeting so that no one could later suggest I had some hidden stake that obligated me to return. And when the email left my outbox, I felt something like a door close and lock from the inside where I finally live. I was putting my laptop to sleep when another message came in from my brother, this time not a performance, but a naked line typed too fast. The officer just said that unless a qualified cosigner appears by the end of the week, they may accelerate the note. Please pick up, I just need to talk, and I looked at those words and let them sit in the silence I have earned. Then I opened a new document and titled it with tomorrow's date, because there is one last piece I have been holding back, and when I step into it, there will be nothing left for them to lean on but themselves. By the next morning, I knew exactly what the last step had to be, and it was not loud or theatrical or designed to make anyone clap. It was the grown woman version of walking out of a room and taking your keys back from the hook. Because the only way this ends cleanly is if there is no hidden cord for them to tug and no quiet obligation left for them to claim by tradition. And that meant I had to withdraw from the one role I never asked for but had performed for years without a title. The family's unofficial manager, the person listed first on every form, the default signer on anything that needed a responsible adult, the emergency plan that they confused for love. I drove to my credit union and closed the auxiliary household account I had set up years ago for family contingencies, which is a fancy label for a slush fund I kept full so my mother would stop calling me at work to ask how to pay this, or that when a deadline had been missed. And I transferred the remainder to my own savings because that money came from my overtime and my weekends and my decision to skip a vacation every year. And then I printed a tidy, unemotional statement that showed each deposit I had made on their behalf for the past few years, and I slid it into the packet with the loan releases and the storage cancellation and the proof of my credit freeze, because if anyone decided to rewrite history later, I wanted facts that do not blink. From there I stopped by a small attorney's office where I had made an appointment 2 days earlier when I first built the list, and I signed a simple decline of appointment for healthcare proxy and durable power of attorney. Which sounds cold until you remember that those documents had my name in bold not because I was the best person for the job, but because I am the person who never says no. And I left instructions that any future emergencies should be directed to my brother as the first point of contact, since he had been publicly named the reliable child by the same woman who had put my number at the top of every page. And I made sure the copies would be mailed certified to my mother and to her primary care clinic so that no nurse would look for me when someone else needed to learn how to show up. The next part was the one I had been saving, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest in a way we have never been allowed to be in this family, and I wrote a short letter to my mother in plain language, no flourishes, no legalese. Just the truth that has been trying to speak through me for years. I told her I love her, and that my love is not a service or a subscription, that I will not participate in a system where affection is a prize and labor is expected, that I will attend future events as a guest or not at all, that I will not clear tables or fix paperwork or translate adult responsibilities into baby food, and that the next time she feels moved to raise a glass and name the child who never disappoints, she should know that I am no longer available to audition for a part she already cast, and I told her that if she wants a relationship with me, then it has to be one where my name is not a lever and my time is not the family budget. And I slid the letter into an envelope with copies of every document I had just executed so that there would be no confusion about what had changed and who changed it. Before I dropped the envelope at the post office, I sent one final email, not to my family, but to the small business accountant who has always liked me because I bring complete files. And I asked him to update the registrar and hosting for my brother's business website that I had quietly set up years ago and kept paying for because it was easier than listening to him complain every time it crashed. And I transferred the billing and admin rights to his company email with a receipt to prove it, which means when the renewal comes due, he will either pay it himself or the site will go dark, and neither outcome has my fingerprints on it. And for the first time since I ever typed his domain into a form, I felt my shoulders drop like a weight had been taken off that I did not remember lifting. I was walking out of the post office when my phone began to light up with a string of messages that landed like a chorus I could recite from memory. My brother first, with that chopped rhythm of panic, saying the bank had moved the meeting up and hinted that terms could tighten within days, asking if I would just come with him to show good faith because they trust me. And then my mother, with a tone I have only ever heard when she thinks she is losing control, telling me that this is family and family requires sacrifice, and if I wanted respect, I should have asked nicely years ago, followed by a voice message that started to cry in the fourth sentence. And I stood there on the sidewalk listening to the echo of old rules trying to reinstall themselves, and I pressed delete, not because I am hard, but because I am done. In the late afternoon, I sent one single text to the family group thread, the only direct communication I planned to make, and I kept it as clean as everything else. I said that I have ended all financial and administrative support, that I will not attend any meetings, that all future requests should go to my brother, that I wish them well, and that when my mother is ready to speak to me without rankings or scripts, I will be at the same number, and I attached one photo of the certified mail receipt because proof is kinder than argument, and then I muted the thread indefinitely, which is a tiny sentence with an enormous effect. That night, when the house was quiet, the last twist arrived, not from a bank or a vendor or a relative hungry for updates, but from Aaron, who texted that my brother had told their circle I had blindsided the family for no reason. And she followed it with a screenshot of the promotional post he had scheduled for his pop-up, the one that listed a location he could only access by unlocking the storage unit that would be closed to him in a handful of days unless he signed it over and paid. And I sat there and felt the rare, steady satisfaction of consequences arranging themselves without me as the stagehand. A little before midnight, one more message slid in, a long one from my brother that started with an apology without saying sorry and moved on to a request without saying please, and somewhere in the middle he quoted my mother's line from the party, almost like he was trying to prove he had heard it too, and he wrote that she had been crying again and asked if that was me, and I stared at those words in the dark and understood that this is the closest we will ever get to acknowledgement, not that I was right, but that I was essential, and I put the phone down and let it buzz on the table while I brushed my teeth and turned down my bed and answered no one, because the point was never to make them hurt. The point was to stop letting them hurt me. In the morning there will be more messages, and there may be versions of the story told in kitchens I will never enter again, and somewhere someone will say I went too far because standing up for yourself always looks like distance to people who have been leaning on you. But the ledger is clean now, my name belongs only to me, and the last move has already landed, because when they reach for the old switch out of habit and nothing turns on, they will finally understand what I have been trying to say without words, which is that I am not the lights, I am the person who used to pay the bill, and I have decided to keep my power.